USPAP, page 129, Advisory Opinion 22 continued. Knowing the property's relevant characteristics also provides the basis for deciding the applicability of an approach to value. Knowledge of the market. The scope of work necessary to ensure an adequate knowledge of the market for the subject property may range from very little, in addition to what the appraiser already knows, to extensive new research. If the subject property is of a type frequently appraised and in a locality where the appraiser regularly provides services, there may be little need for extensive market research beyond confirmation that the data available for analysis is current, adequate, relevant, and credible. However, if the property involved is not of a type regularly appraised by the appraiser, or if the market area is not familiar to the appraiser, the extent of research needs to be sufficient for the appraiser to acquire competency. As stated in the competency rule, this can be achieved in several ways: self-study, association with a locally knowledgeable and competent appraiser, etc. The critically important aspect of this factor in the scope of work decision is to recognize when additional research is necessary. A competent professional appraiser will not assume knowledge merely for the sake of convenience. Even though the appraiser might be actively involved in appraising a particular type of property in a given locality, self-imposed professional discipline will prompt that individual to ensure that the scope of work includes verification that the market data used in the analysis is credible, relevant, appropriate, adequate, and as current as possible. This is consistent with the requirements stated in SR 1-1B, which is designed to ensure that the scope of work completed in an appraisal is sufficient to produce credible opinions and conclusions, given the intended use of the appraisal. Knowledge of alternatives. An understanding of market behavior requires a scope of work that includes research and analysis that is sufficient to ensure competent knowledge of the supply and demand relationships that are relevant to the time frame and the type of property involved in the appraisal. In a market value appraisal, this means gathering, verifying, and evaluating data about sales, listings, and failed efforts to sell competitive property, as well as more generalized market data. Conditions of sale. A market value appraisal requires research and analysis of market data sufficient to develop a reasonable opinion of exposure time. See the comment to SR 1-2C and Advisory Opinion 35. With the property marketed in whatever manner is typical for that type of property in its locality. An appraiser working in different market areas should guard against presuming that a marketing process common in one area is typical in all areas. For example, In some markets, property is customarily sold through an auction arrangement, while in others, professional brokerage is the norm. And in still others, so-called for sale by owner is the typical process. Each process in a given time period and locality for the type of property involved can be normal. The identification of the marketing process and exposure time requires an understanding of the subject's market. Market value definitions imply a sale of the property wherein the buyer and seller are typically motivated. This condition requires that the level of research in a market value assignment is sufficient to understand the motivations of the buyers and sellers for the sales used in the approaches to value. The motivations that lead to a sale play a critical role in establishing the relevancy or irrelevancy of a sale as a comparable one in an assignment. Analysis of sale data can yield numeric results, but the numbers lack real meaning without an understanding of the market conditions that generated the sales involved. Without an understanding of what the market conditions were at the time of a sale, as well as the conditions of a particular sale, an appraiser cannot reasonably conclude that the sale price or any element of comparison based on that price is a reliable indicator of market value. Subjects, marketing and sale history and reconciliation. The appraiser's scope of work decision in a market value appraisal needs to recognize the research and analysis steps that are necessary to comply with the requirements stated in SR 1 through 5 and SR 1 through 6. Those requirements have two objectives, both of which are especially important in a market value appraisal. The first is to ensure that the appraiser makes the effort to obtain relevant information about current and recent market activity involving the subject's property, SR 1-5A and B. The due diligence effort is consistent with the requirements stated in Standards Rule 1-1B. It also serves as a safeguard against confusing the price in a contract, which means agreement of sale or option, or an offering with the market value, and as a safeguard against the appraiser being inadvertently involved in an effort to conceal the facts in regard to one or more recent sale transactions.